If you'd like to improve the consistency of your shots, then controlling the club face is imperative. And the biggest factor in terms of controlling the club face is how the wrists move throughout the swing. But what doesn't often get much discussion is how you position the wrists at setup, primarily how you grip the club. Are you able to put your hands and club into a consistent start position, which would, by definition, lead to a more consistent delivery? We can use the Hack Motion wrist sensor to just take a look at what that would look like. The best players, when they're setting up to the golf ball, are able to put this lead wrist into a similar spot. I hold my natural grip here. I've got around 20 to 22, 23 degrees of extension. That's a very small amount of cupping in this lead wrist. Now, that's pretty normal, that's pretty standard, and I would encourage you to look to have some extension in that lead wrist when you set up. But really, the key here would be to make use of the device to see if I can do it the same every single time. If I'm setting up in an inconsistent fashion where my grip changes, you'll see how the 44 degrees of extension there where I've changed my grip, or if I was to set up, put the ball in a slightly different position, hold the handle in a slightly different spot, now I've only got 4 degrees of extension. The way that this changes influences tremendously how you control the club face, and ultimately that's going to play a massive role in how you control your ball flight. So having the ability to set up in a way that you put the club in the same spot with that wrist in around 20 degrees of extension, again there you see that's 19, step away, regrip the club, go through my setup, there's 21, 22 degrees of extension. I'm able to put the club in a similar position every single time. You'd want to look to try to be able to do this with all the clubs in your bag. You should want to take a look at how you position your hands and the handle and the shaft of the club and try to recreate those numbers each and every time you set up. There again, there's 23 degrees, that's pretty consistent. That would be something to strive for. I would also encourage you to look at getting the numbers around that sort of mid-teen to mid-20s number of extension at setup. That's a pretty decent place to be. And I'm going to share with you now also some of the things that you can do at setup with your wrist position to encourage certain things to happen. It's pretty obvious if you watch enough golf that not everybody stands to the ball in exactly the same way. A good example of that would be someone like Bryson DeChambeau, who stands with this very high handle, versus someone more like a Keegan Bradley who has the handle down much lower. Why do they do those things, and what can you learn from that that's useful that you could take to the driving range and try? Well, let me share this with you. The more up you have your wrists at setup, this is an ulnar deviation where you're bending the wrist down in this fashion, the Bryson setup, if you like, you're going to see a couple of things happen. First of all, on the Hack Motion, you're going to notice at setup that extension number is reduced. It's all the way down to 3 or 4 degrees. That's because as I flex my wrist down, or I ulnar deviate my wrist down, my wrist will flatten. That will help you to close the club face, all things being equal. So if you struggle with an open club face, or you slice the golf ball, having more ulnar deviation, which by definition leads to a little bit more wrist flexion, will help you to control the club face, help you to close the club face relative to what you had it before. So as I say, if you tend to slice the ball, setting up with the handle higher like Bryson, whether that's with this 8-iron that I'm doing here, or more likely with your driver, setting up with the handle higher will promote you hitting balls that curve more from right to left. That one curves from right to left. Managed to get the wrists pretty much in a good range there. I hit that slightly thin, but I got the draw shape that I would expect from wrist conditions at setup like that. So if you see somebody who has the handle very high, you'll find that they'll tend to move the ball in that draw pattern. I didn't make great contact with that one because I'm doing that so extreme, but you'll get the idea that the higher the handle, the more flex in the wrist, the more closed the club face, the easier it is to draw the ball, or for you it might just be easier to not slice it as much. So that ball again is going to curve from right to left. And you can take from that, hopefully those of you paying attention, you'll take from that the idea that, okay, if I do the opposite's going to happen, and you would be correct. Setting up with the handle lower tends to encourage more wrist extension. We'll see that on the hack motion right now. So as I set up with a lower handle position, with the toe of the golf club more off the ground, I'm now into 36 degrees of extension. That's a lot more than I had in my standard setup. This setup is more akin to what you would think about if you were hitting a bunker shot, you'd stand further from the ball, or if you're hitting a high lob shot, you'd stand further from the ball. And the reason you stand further from the ball is putting more extension into your wrist allows you to open the club face more, hit these balls higher. So more extension in the wrist typically means a more open club face, slightly higher shots, and balls that would tend to go more to the right or even curve to the right. So again, this is useful for you if A, you're a slicer and you can recognize that, hey, I'm setting up with my hands way too low. If I put them higher up, that would help me. Or this would help you if you're somebody who hooks the ball to the left excessively. You might be able to say, okay, I take this piece of information, and rather than setting up standard, whatever your standard currently is, I need to incorporate more of the wrist down at setup, put more of that extension in. So quick question for you, did you know that 80% of your golf ball's direction comes from the club face angle at impact, and it's your wrists that control that angle? If you want to hit straighter shots and add more distance to your game, then check out the link in the description below. So we take the hack motion, for example, and rather than a 19 degrees of regular, I'm going to push the handle down. There's 31 degrees of extension. Now I'm going to hit this shot. I'd expect to see a much higher ball flight and a ball that curves a little bit more to the right side. Low handle, go ahead and hit it. That's basically flown dead straight, no curve. In fact, the face to path relationship was less than 1 degree, so that was a perfectly straight shot. And that doesn't surprise me actually, because my tendency is to overdraw the ball, hit it too much from right to left. So lowering the handle like that for me helps me to not hook the ball as much. It may not make me slice or fade the ball, but it reduced how much I would tend to curve the ball or over curve the ball to the left. So there's the lesson in understanding how the wrists should be positioned at setup. Find your standard, find your normal, look at the type of shot you're typically hitting, the curve on your golf ball, and then look to either add more ulnar or flexion if you want to hit the ball less to the right or more to the left as a right-handed golfer, or put in more extension or radial deviation, the upward hinging of the wrist, putting more extension or radial deviation if you want to hook the ball less or curve the ball more to the right. Those are the lessons to take from today's session. Using the hack motion, you can really dial into the detail of exactly what the wrist is doing. And once you find where you should be and what produces the best shots for you, then you can train with this device to make sure you're putting the wrist into that same position at setup every single time. I hope you found the video useful and you can take those tips to the driving range next time you go. If you'd like to learn more about wrist training and how the hack motion wrist sensor can help improve your golf, click on the link in the description below that will take you to more wrist training videos.